The woman they thought was poor. The champagne glass slipped from Amelia Carter's hand and shattered across the polished marble floor. For a while, nobody moved. 200 guests stood beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Royal Lancaster Hotel in London, dressed in designer suits and expensive evening gowns, staring at the woman in the simple navy dress standing beside the wedding table. Then her sounded like a laugh. "Honestly, Mum," Daniel said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Could you try not to embarrass me for just one evening?" A few people smiled. Someone in the back actually laughed. Amelia looked down at the broken glass. Her hands were shaking. She had spent 3 weeks choosing that dress because she knew Daniel's new family cared about appearances. It had cost her £38 from a charity shop in Richmond. She had ironed it twice. She even polished her old black shoes until they looked almost new. She had brought Daniel a small gift wrapped in brown paper. And now his new mother-in-law was looking at her with open disgust. "Daniel," the woman said, "perhaps your mother would be more comfortable at home." The words were polite. The meaning was not. Amelia slowly bent down to pick up a piece of glass. "Leave it," Daniel snapped. "The staff will deal with it." She looked up at her for him. There was something in his face she had never seen before. Not angry. Not embarrassment. Shame. He was ashamed of her. Amelia stood up slowly. "I only wanted to give you your wedding present." Daniel sighed. "Not now, Mum." The room went quiet again. Amelia held the small brown parcel against her chest. "Of course," she whispered. Then she turned towards the doors. She was almost outside when a voice behind her stopped the entire room. "Mrs. Carter." Amelia froze. She knew that voice. She turned around. A tall man in a black dinner jacket was standing beside the head table. His face had gone completely pale. It was Sir Jonathan Harrington, one of the most powerful property developers in Britain. He stared at Amelia as if he had just seen someone who was supposed to be dead. "Mrs. Carter," he repeated. "Is that really you?" Amelia said nothing. Jonathan walked toward her. Slowly, carefully, as though every step was taking him closer to something he was afraid to believe. Then he stopped in front of her. "You can't be here." Daniel frowned. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Jonathan ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on Amelia. "Are you Eleanor Black?" The room seemed to stop breathing. Amelia's expression changed. Only slightly. But Jonathan saw it. His mouth fell open. "My God." He looked at Daniel. "Your mother is Eleanor Black?" Daniel laughed nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about. Her name is Amelia Carter." Jonathan took a step back. "No." His voice was barely audible. "Her name is Eleanor Black." He looked around the room. Then he said something that changed everything. "She owns Harrington Developments." Nobody laughed this time. Not one person. Daniel's smile disappeared. His new wife, Sophie, stared at Amelia. "What?" Jonathan swallowed. "The company your father spent 30 years building." He pointed towards Amelia. "Was impressed by her." Daniel's face turned white. "Bought by who?" Jonathan looked straight at Amelia. "By Eleanor Black." Silence. Then Amelia finally spoke. "Mr. Harrington." Jonathan shook his head. "Please." His voice trembled. "Not Mr. Harrington." He looked almost frightened. "After everything you've done for us, you can call me Jonathan." Daniel stared at his mother. "Mum." Amelia looked at him. For 31 years, she had waited for that word to be spoken with affection. Now it sounded like fear. And she realized something painful. Daniel had never really known his mother. He only knew the woman she allowed him to see. The 31 years earlier, Amelia had been 27 years old. She was married to a gentleman named Peter. They lived in a small terraced house in Leeds. They didn't have much money, but they had a laugh. They had a little boy, and they had plans. Peter worked as a mechanic. Amelia worked in an estate agency during the day and studied accountancy at night. They dreamed of buying their own business one day. Then Peter died. A motorway accident. One phone call. One policeman at the front door. One sentence that destroyed Amelia's life. Mrs. Carter. I'm terribly sorry. Daniel was 4 years old. Amelia became a single mother overnight. She had no savings, not inheritance, no family wealth, only a 4-year-old boy who needed her. So it worked, and worked, and worked. She cleaned offices at night. She worked reception during the day. She studied accounting after Daniel went to bed. There were nights when she slept for only 3 hours. But she never complained. When Daniel was 16, he started becoming embarrassed by her. His friends had wealthy parents. Their mothers drove expensive cars. They went skiing in France. They wore designer clothes. Amelia wore the same 3 coats for years. Daniel began telling people that his mother worked in administration. He never told them she cleaned offices. He never told them she sometimes took 2 buses home because she couldn't afford a taxi. He never told them that she packed her school lunches while eating toast for dinner herself. Amelia noticed. But she said nothing. She thought it was a phase. She was wrong. By the time Daniel was 25, he had become obsessed with money. He wanted a bigger house. The better expensive? A wealthier social circle. And eventually, he met Sophie Harrington. Sophie was beautiful, confident, and wealthy. Her father owned Harrington Developments. Her family lived in a mansion in Surrey. Daniel fell in love with the life before he fell in love with the woman. Amelia knew it. But she kept quiet. Because mothers sometimes stay silent when they should speak. And sometimes that silence costs more than words ever could. Chapter 2. What Daniel never knew was that Amelia's life had changed 20 years earlier. It happened in a tiny office in Manchester. She had been cleaning up after midnight. A group of executives were having a meeting. They thought she was invisible. People often speak differently when they believe nobody important is listening. Amelia heard them discussing a property deal. A development in Birmingham. The figures didn't make sense. The company was preparing to sell several buildings for far less than their actual value. Amelia knew numbers. She had spent years studying them. She looked at the paperwork left on a desk. Then she saw it. The pattern. Someone was moving money through 3 separate companies. She could have ignored it. Instead, she wrote down what she saw. The next morning, she sent an anonymous letter to the company's chairman. 3 weeks later, an investigation began. The fraud was exposed. Millions of pounds were recovered. And someone asked, "Who found this?" Nobody knew. Except Amelia. She expected nothing. Instead, she received a phone call. "Mrs. Carter." "Yeah? This is Jonathan Harrington." Amelia almost dropped the phone. "I'd love to meet you." They put in a small cafe. Jonathan arrived expecting an employee. Instead, he found a woman who understood his company's finances better than some of his directors. He asked her questions. She answered them. Then he offered her a job. Not cleaning. Finance. Amelia refused. "I can't leave my son." So Jonathan made another offer. Part-time. Flexible. Amelia accepted. For the next 15 years, she quietly became the person Jonathan trusted most. She discovered failing businesses. She found fraudulent accounts. She negotiated property purchases. She rebuilt companies that other people had abandoned. But she never changed her lifestyle. Why? Because she learned something early. Money attracts people, but secrecy reveals them. She wanted to know who would love her if she had nothing. And she wants to know who would love her only if she had everything. Unfortunately, she already had someone she desperately wanted to believe would choose her. Daniel, her son. Chapter 3. After the wedding, Daniel called her the next morning. Mum. Amelia replied calmly. Yeah? About last night. There was a long pause. I'm sorry. Amelia closed her eyes. Thank you. I didn't mean what I said. You called me embarrassing. I was stressed. You told me to go home. I was under pressure. You allowed Sophie's mother to humiliate me. Daniel sighed. Can we not go through everything? Amelia almost laughed. Of course. Another silence. Then Daniel asked, who was that man? Which man? Jonathan Harrington. Amelia looked out of the window. He's Sophie's father. No. I mean, what did he mean when he said you owned his company? Amelia smiled. I think he was mistaken. Don't lie to me. She looked at the phone. Daniel had never sounded like that before. Why would you think I'm lying? Because Dad used to talk about Harrington Developments. Amelia said nothing. Daniel continued. That company nearly went bankrupt 6 years ago. I know. It was bought by an anonymous investor. Many companies are. The investor saved it. That's what I heard. People said the investor was worth hundreds of millions. Amelia walked towards the kitchen. That's interesting. Mum. Yeah? Are you that investor? Amelia smiled. No. It was technically true. The company had been bought by a corporation. The corporation belonged to another corporation. And that corporation belonged to Eleanor Black. A name Daniel had never heard. Right, Daniel said. Then he hung up. Amelia stood alone in her kitchen. For the first time in years, she wondered if the secret had become too large to keep. Chapter 4. 3 days later, Daniel arrived at his house. He didn't like Halo. Sophie was with him. They sat in Amelia's small sitting room. Sophie looked around. The furniture was old. The carpet was faded. There were no expensive paintings. Not designer ornaments. No evidence of wealth. Sophie smiled. I suppose this is why you never visited our house. Amelia looked at her. What do you mean? You would have felt uncomfortable. No. I know people like you can feel intimidated around wealthy families. Amelia almost smiled. People like you. She'd heard those words her whole life. I don't feel intimidated by wealth, Amelia said. Sophie laughed. Of course. Daniel leaned forward. Mum. We need to ask you something. Go on. Are you Eleanor Black? Amelia looked at him. No. Sophie relaxed. Daniel didn't. Then why did Jonathan call you that? I don't know. Why did he say you saved his company? I can't explain another man's confusion. Sophie leaned forward. How much money do you have? Daniel looked embarrassed. Sophie. What? That's rude. She shrugged. We need to know. Amelia looked at them both. Then she asked, why? Neither answered. Why does it matter how much money I have? Sophie looked away. Daniel rubbed his forehead. We're having financial problems. There it was. The real reason. Amelia felt something inside her break. What kind of problems? Daniel swallowed. About £180,000. Sophie corrected him. £214,000. Daniel looked at her. We don't need to tell Mum everything. You said we were going to be honest. Amelia remained silent. Sophie continued. The wedding cost more than expected. I see. The house needs repairs. I see. Daniel has business debts. I see. And the bank is asking questions. Amelia looked at her son. How long have you been here? Daniel whispered. About £214,000. Amelia nodded. Then Sophie said the sentence Amelia had been expecting. We thought perhaps you could help. Amelia looked down at her hands. These were the same hands that had cleaned offices. The same hands that held Daniel when he was a baby. The same hands that had signed contracts worth millions. But Daniel didn't know that. How much would you need? She asked. All of it, Sophie said. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Maybe less. Sophie ignored him. Could you help us? Amelia looked at her son. If it were £214,000. She paused. Would you still want me as your mother? Daniel's face changed. Mum. That's unfair. Is it? He had no answer. Chapter 5. Amelia decided to test him. Not because she wanted revenge. Because she needed the truth. She told Daniel that she knew someone who could arrange a loan. The private investor. Someone who values discretion. Daniel immediately became interested. Who? I can't say. How much could they lend? Probably £250,000. Sophie leaned forward. What would they want? Security. Like what? Your house. Daniel frowned. Anything else? Your cars. Sophie looked alarmed. Would that be enough? Amelia stared at her. You'd give up your house and cars for money from a stranger. Sophie answered without hesitation. If it saves our marriage, yes. Daniel looked at her. Then at his mom. We don't have a choice. Amelia nodded. Perhaps. She stood up. Come back tomorrow. What happens tomorrow? Daniel asked. You'll find out. The next evening, Amelia placed a folder on the table. Daniel and Sophie sat opposite her. Amelia opened it. Inside was a contract. It looked official. It wasn't. I've arranged the money. Sophie almost cried with relief. Really? Yes. How? That's not important. Daniel picked up the contract. He read the first page. Then stopped. What does this mean? It means the investor will pay your debts. Sophie read the conditions. First condition, sell the house. Yes. Second, sell both cars. Yes. Third, no new credit cards for 5 years. Yes. Fourth, you must both work. Sophie looked up. What? You heard me? We already work. I know. Why is that a condition? Because you need to learn to live within your means. Sophie continued reading. Then her expression changed. There's another condition. Yes. What? Amelia looked at Daniel. You have to spend 1 year volunteering at a community center. Sophie stared at her. Why? Because the investor wants proof that you understand what life looks like outside your social circle. Sophie pushed the contract away. This is ridiculous. Daniel looked thoughtful. It isn't. What? Daniel looked at Amelia. Mum, would you do this? Would I? Give up everything to start again? Amelia smiled sadly. I already did. Daniel looked confused. She said nothing more. Chapter 6. The next morning, Daniel discovered something. His father had left him a small box. It had been stored in the loft for years. Inside were old photographs. Peter, Amelia, Daniel and his child. And one photograph Daniel had never seen before. Amelia was standing beside Jonathan Harrington. Daniel stared at it. On the back was a handwritten note. To Amelia, the bravest person I've ever worked with. Daniel's hands began to shake. He called Jonathan. Mr. Harrington. Daniel, I need to ask you something. Of course. Who is Eleanor Black? There was silence. Where did you hear that name? My mother. Jonathan sat down. What did she tell you? Nothing. Another silence. Then Jonathan said, Daniel, your mother asked me never to tell you. Tell me what? Everything. A meeting arranged by Jonathan. Daniel arrived alone. The meeting took place in my office overlooking London. Jonathan closed the door. Your mother saved my company? Daniel stared at him. How? She discovered fraud. When? 20 years ago. Daniel's mouth went dry. Then what happened? She became my most trusted advisor. Why did she remain poor? Jonathan smiled sadly. She wasn't poor. Daniel felt the world tilt. How rich is she? Jonathan looked at him. That's not the right question. What is the right question? Why did she hide it from you? Daniel had no answer. Jonathan continued. Your mom is one of the most intelligent businesswomen I've ever met. Daniel stared at the floor. Why didn't she tell me? Because she wanted to know whether you loved Amelia Carter. He looked up. Or Eleanor Black. Daniel closed his eyes. Then he remembered the wedding. His mother's cheap dress. Her old shoes. The small brown parcel. His own voice. Could you try not to be embarrassed? He suddenly felt sick. Chapter 7. Daniel returned to Amelia's house that evening. He didn't knock. He stood outside for several minutes. Then he entered. His mother was sitting at the kitchen table. She was reading a newspaper. Hi, Mum. She looked up. Hello. Daniel sat opposite her. I know. Amelia said nothing. I know about Eleanor Black. Amelia folded the newspaper. Do you? Told me Jonathan. She sighed. Then you know. How much money do you have? Amelia looked at him. That's your first question. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. No. He shook his head. I'm sorry. Sorry for what? For everything. Amelia whited. Daniel looked at his hands. I was ashamed of you. I know. I thought you were poor. I know. I thought your job made me look bad. I know. I told people you were nobody. I know. He cried a little. It was horrible. Amelia didn't move. Why didn't you tell me? Because I want you to love me without knowing. Daniel looked at her. And did you? Amelia's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. That response hurt him more than anything else. Chapter 10. 6 months later, Amelia received an invitation. It was because of Sophie. The wedding had been a disaster. But Sophie wanted another ceremony. Not another wedding. My apologies. She invited everyone who had witnessed Amelia being humiliated. 200 people returned to the same hotel. Amelia entered wearing a simple black dress. This time, she didn't hide. The room fell silent. Sophie walked to the center. Daniel stood beside her. Jonathan Harrington was there too. Sophie took a breath. 6 months ago, I watched a woman being humiliated. She looked at Amelia. And I did nothing. Her voice trembled. You judged her because of her clothes. She swallowed. You judged her because of where she lived. She looked at the guests. And I believe that wealth made someone more valuable than other people. Nobody moved. Sophie continued. That woman was Amelia Carter. She paused. She was also Eleanor Black. A murmur moved through the room. Sophie raised her voice. But her wealth isn't the reason I'm apologizing. She turned to Amelia. I'm apologizing because she was treated like she was worthless. Her eyes filled with tears. And she never deserved it. Then Daniel walked forward. He held the same small brown parcel his mother had brought to the original wedding. Mum. Amelia looked at him. Daniel opened it. Inside was a simple photograph. Peter, Amelia, Daniel. The three of them together. Found this in Dad's old box. Amelia began crying. Daniel handed it to her. That's what I should have treasured all along. He looked around the room. Not money, not houses, not expensive, not status. My mother, Chapter 11. Amelia eventually opened the company documents to Daniel. But she didn't give him the empire. Instead, she offered him something far more difficult. A job. Works for me. Daniel looked surprised. Doing what? Starting at the bottom. He laughed. How far at the bottom? Very bottom. What does it pay? Enough to live. And if I fail? You try again. And if I happen? You earn more. Daniel smiled. That's it. That's life. He accepted. For the next 2 years, Daniel worked. He learned accounting, property management, negotiation, leadership. He made a mistake. He corrected them. He learned that wealth wasn't about expensive watches. It was about responsibility. And Amelia learned something too. She didn't have to hide anymore. She could be Amelia Carter. She could have been Eleanor Black. She could be both. Chapter 12. 3 years later, Amelia stood in front of a charity center in East London. The building had once been abandoned. Now it provided meals, training and temporary accommodation for families struggling with debt. Daniel stood beside her. So this is what you're doing with the money? Amelia smiled. Some of it. How much? Enough. He laughed. You still won't tell me? No. They watched a group of children running across the courtyard. Daniel looked at his mother. I think I finally understand. Understand what? Why you stayed poor when you weren't poor? Amelia smiled. Tell me. You weren't trying to hide money. She waited. You were trying to protect what money couldn't buy. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. Exactly. Daniel put his arm around her. I wish I'd understood sooner. I know about I. Epilogue. Years later, Amelia would sometimes think about that wedding. The broken glass. The cruel laughter. The brown parcel. Her son's a shame. Jonathan's shocked face. And the moment the entire room discovered that the woman they had considered insignificant was actually one of the most powerful people in the room. But Amelia didn't remember the humiliation with anger. She remembered it as a lesson. Because sometimes life doesn't reveal people's true character when you give them everything. It reveals it when they think you have nothing. Daniel eventually became a successful businessman. But he never forgot where he started. Every year, on the anniversary of his father's death, he takes his mother back to Leeds. They visited the old terraced house. They walked past the garage where Peter had worked. They sat in the same little cafe where Amelia had once dreamed about becoming financially independent. One rainy afternoon, Daniel asked her a question. Mum, if you could go back to the night of my wedding, would you change anything? Amelia thought about it. Then she smiled. No, nothing, nothing. Even the humiliation? She looked through the cafe window in the rain. Especially that. Daniel looked confused. Why? Because that was the night you finally met your mother. He smiled. And Eleanor Black? Amelia laughed. She was always your mother too. Daniel reached across the table and held her hand. I love you, Mum. Amelia squeezed her fingers. I know. Then she looked out at the rainy streets of Leeds. For most of her life, she had believed that being invisible was the safest way to survive. She had to hide her wealth. She had hidden her success. She had to hide her pain. But eventually she discovered something far more valuable than money. Truth. Because money can buy a house. It can buy a company. It can rescue a failing business. It can even change the direction of an entire family. But money cannot make someone love you. It cannot make someone respect you. And it certainly cannot teach someone how to be a good human